Good morning and welcome to a media briefing on the impact of sanctions on the International Criminal Court. This morning's briefing, we are joined by eminences from situation countries that are affected by the atrocity crimes under the ICC's jurisdiction. And we are also joined by experts who can tell us the impact of sanctions on that institution. My name is Rebecca Shute. I am the Executive Director of Citizens for Global Solutions and the co-convener of the Washington Working Group for the International Criminal Court, which recently disseminated an open letter that has been signed by more than 130 civil society organizations decrying the threat of sanctions on the court. And as we look towards a potential Senate vote this afternoon, we also welcome the news that a number of European states this morning have published a letter to Congress likewise decrying the sanctions. This event will be recorded and the recording will be available to any who wish to view it after the fact. We will have a very brief round of introductory remarks by our speakers, and then we will have the availability for question and answer. And when we do the question and answer component, I will elevate those who wish to take the floor to panelist. You will be prompted to re-enter, and then you will have the availability to take the video and put your microphone on. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Adam Keith, who's the Senior Director of Accountability at Human Rights First. Adam is responsible for Human Rights First work advancing human rights in U.S. foreign policy with a focus on tools and institutions that help promote accountability for serious abuses and corruption. And Adam will give us a bit of the lay of the land of what we know about the impact of sanctions on the International Criminal Court and those who rely on its justice as the court of last resort. Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rebecca. I will be very brief. I think the point and I think the interesting part of this call is to hear perspectives from our non-US panelists. But I will say a few words about the impact of the sanctions that are being threatened, which we've been opposing for some years. The impact of the sanctions can be hard to specify because it will depend eventually on how many people and which people specifically the US government sanctions. And we can't know that until the administration acts, whether it does that under existing law as it is, and as it did in 2020 in the last Trump administration, or if that law is reinforced with a new piece of legislation that, as Rebecca mentioned, the Senate is beginning to consider today. We do know what that legislation demands, and we do know generally how sanctions work. On that basis, we've been warning that the sanctions will be quite damaging if they're imposed, both to survivors and others who are seeking justice and to U.S. interests more broadly defined. Again, just very briefly about how sanctions work. They work directly and indirectly. The first part, the legislation that's being considered would require the executive branch to sanction any foreign person who carries out or aids certain ICC investigations. And as the law is written, that's not just the Palestine investigation. It's also the Philippines investigation that the ICC is conducting. And a large number of ICC officials, judges, prosecutors, investigators, outside advisors, even potentially NGOs or witnesses would fit those criteria. Many of those people are nationals or very close US allies. All of them are essentially doing their jobs. If they were to be sanctioned, that would mean they would be barred from entering the United States. Property that they have here would be frozen, and it would become illegal for US persons to transact with those people or to support them. And that's where the indirect impact of the sanctions comes in. Any US individual or company can face financial or criminal penalties for supporting a sanctioned person. So if the ICC's chief prosecutor himself is sanctioned, much of civil society's advocacy to the ICC could be penalized as support for a sanctioned person, which could mean effectively criminalizing the sharing of evidence or other forms of support to some of to any of the ICC's investigations. If a lot of ICC officials are ultimately sanctioned, meaning more than were sanctioned in 2020, companies that provide basic services to the court and have a presence in the US could effectively be forced to stop doing that. We know in practice that risk aversion leads even companies that have no US presence or no exposure to the United States to over-comply with sanctions. And that reality is what's behind some of the warnings that we've been giving and others, that all of the ICC's operations could be in danger, including investigations in all of the countries that our colleagues on the panel today come from. There are ways to challenge these sanctions legally, but it's much easier for affected American citizens to do that than others. And so our bottom line call is for the court's member states to support the court, to be vocal and conspicuous in their support for the court, and at the same time for members of Congress not to give cover for the administration to carry out this kind of attack on an incredibly important institution. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Adam. And now we'll turn to one of our first speaker from a situation country. It is my immense honor to welcome Oleksandra Matviichuk, who's a Ukrainian human rights lawyer and civil society leader based in Kyiv. She heads the nonprofit organization Center for Civil Liberties, which was the Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2022. And she's a campaigner for democratic reforms in her country and the OSCE region. And since October 2022, she has been the vice president of the International Federation for Human Rights. Ms. Matviichuk, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I'm documenting war crimes in this war which Russia has launched against Ukraine for 11 years. While this war turns people into the numbers, what we are literally doing, we are returning people their names, because people are not numbers, because life of each person matters. We are documenting how Russian troops deliberately shelling residential buildings, schools, churches, museums, and hospitals, attacking evacuation corridors, torturing people in filtration camps, forcibly taking Ukrainian children to Russia, how they ban Ukrainian language and culture, how they abducting, robbing, raping, and killing civilians in the occupied territories. And all these atrocities, which we are documenting, it's a result of the leadership decision of Putin and top political officials and high military command of Russian state to do it. And my first message on this briefing is that International Criminal Court is the only existing international mechanism which provides us a chance to make Putin and his surrounding accountable. And International Criminal Court did a great job. International Criminal Court issued arrest warrant against Putin and his child commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova for the illegal deportation and transferring of Ukrainian children to Russia, and 6 arrest warrants against other top military officials of Russian state for the deliberate destruction of energy infrastructure in Ukraine. And second message is that all these crimes which we are documenting, it's also a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades, because Russian troops committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, Moldova, Georgia, Mali, Libya, Syria, other countries of the world. Putin has never been punished. He believes he can do whatever he wants. And International Criminal Court is an existing instrument how we can break the circle of impunity. And it's important not just for people in Ukraine, because if we not be able to stop Putin, he will go further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Matviichuk. And next, we would like to turn to our guest from the Philippines, Mr. Dino S. de Leon, who is a human rights lawyer, the spokesperson of former Senator Leila de Lima, and director at the Human Rights and People Empowerment Center. Mr. de Leon, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dino de Leon. The Filipino people calls on its friends, the American people, to allow us to continue with our quest for justice for the atrocities that our people suffered under Rodrigo Roa Duterte's murderous regime. Known as the Punisher, Duterte was under investigation for vigilante-like killings of suspected drug addicts and criminals in Davao City, which was known as the Davao Death Squad, or DDS. As early as June 28, 2009, through the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, led by its then chairperson, former Senator Leila de Lima, has been trying to investigate and further prevent Duterte's violent attacks against our people. At that time, bodies have been piling in the streets of Davao, including those of the vulnerable and minors, with placards stating, "I am an addict, don't copy me," a pattern that was later on adopted nationally when the drug war was launched. Unfortunately, our institutions have not been strong enough or have not been willing and able enough to ensure that there would be justice for the violence suffered by our people under Duterte. Duterte won the presidency and nationalized the violence he started in Davao City and used intelligence and confidential funds to create a national killing machine. In other words, he used government money to kill our own people. Within the first year of Duterte's presidency, a consistent pattern of killings haunted the country when Duterte and PNP chief Ronaldo Bato de la Rosa, now a senator, launched their violent but fake war on drugs. Per the data of the Philippine National Police, the killings under Duterte numbered at least 29,000, which is similar to the estimate of the International Criminal Court. While the number of deaths related to Duterte's violent drug war on drugs are not readily definite because of the sheer quantity of those victimized, the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights estimates that, even counting conservatively, at least 8,663 people had been killed in Duterte's drug war, or almost 300% of the number of deaths in the worst terrorist attack in the United States. Per report of the World Organization Against Torture and the Children's Legal Rights Development Center, victims included at least 122 children who were deliberately killed. Our friends in the United States, allow us to get justice, allow us to heal from this violence. Please allow us to resort to international criminal justice mechanisms, as the Dutertes have evaded our local accountability mechanisms due to their influence and power. In the name of the grieving families of the victims of the violent Philippine drug war, we urge members of the U.S. Congress to withdraw their support to the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act. Stopping impunity all over the world is all within our common interests. And while we are in the other side of the world, peace in the Philippines is crucial for the U.S.'s geopolitical interests, especially since the Philippines is a treaty ally and a major non-NATO ally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. De Leon. And now we turn to Mr. Kyaw Win, who is a UK-based human rights activist born and raised in Rangoon, Burma, now Myanmar. In 2009, Win moved to the UK and joined the Burmese Muslim Association. And today he is the executive director of the Burma Human Rights Network and leads several different teams inside of Myanmar who are documenting human rights violations. Mr. Win, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here today. I understand that my previous speakers have spoken and very eloquently about the situations. And I may say that Myanmar is right now, we are facing the civil war, and the cruelty and barbarism that is everywhere in Burma. You can see that the military has been committing genocide, crime against humanity, and war crimes, and crimes over all the international crimes. There is no crime left that this military didn't commit it. So for the people of Burma, the millions of people of Burma, and the Rohingya communities and other different all ethnic minorities, there is only one hope we have, that International Criminal Court one day punish those perpetrators and send them to the right place for them. And US has been one of our main ally in this struggle and main supporter for the people of Burma, who desperate people of Burma, to raise our voice. And I'm very shocked to see that today, we are seeing that our friend and our ally is taking a very serious step, that punishing one of the only international criminal code, that is one of the only international mechanism that could punish all the perpetrators. And that is only hope for the people of Burma who are suffering today, that one day we believe that these people will be punished. And sanctioning the International Criminal Code, it could smash our dreams, and it could take away our right to have justice. And that is something we are very seriously concerned about that. And this is the signal. This is a message, giving the signal to all the perpetrators in the world that they could kill as much as they like. And one day they will get impunity when some leading one of the powerful country in the world who consider to sanction one of our hope, our dreams. So that's we urge to the U.S. government to reconsider again in order to sanction one of the most important hope for the people of Burma, and also all the oppressed people around the world. This is something we take very serious. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Win. We may be joined by another speaker, but at this time, I would like to open the floor. Our panelists have very kindly made themselves available for any questions that you may have. I will now elevate you as panelist. I see Rachel. I'm promoting you. This might take just a moment.
Hi, thank you for taking my question and for organizing this panel. I was interested in hearing more about how civil society organizations collecting evidence might feel that they would come under these sanctions, depending on how they are interpreted, and also the way people can, in anticipation of sanctioning, withdraw support, technical support. Can you talk a little bit more about how that works?
Thank you for that question. I think several of our panelists could speak very cogently to that, but I have seen Oleksandra, and I know the work that the Center for Civil Liberties does in documentation. Perhaps you'd like to start out, and then anybody else can jump in.
It's very difficult for me to predict how to influence to my organization, but my organization and me personally was the first authors of submission to International Criminal Court in 2014. And since this time, for all these 11 years, when we collected evidence of the Russian atrocities, we always provide information to International Criminal Court, which we have been documenting. And we plan to continue to do it because we documenting these crimes not just for national archives, not just for international memory, but for justice. We documenting these crimes so that sooner or later, all Russians who committed these crimes by their own hands, as well as Putin and top political leadership and high military command, will be brought to justice. So we will continue our cooperation, and I have no idea what to expect us as a human rights organization in future.
Thank you, Oleksandra. I'm going to turn to Adam maybe, and any of our other panelists who want to share their perspective very briefly, but we also have another speaker who's joined us who I'll introduce after we deal with this round of questions. Adam.
Thanks for the question, Rachel. As Oleksandra makes clear, I think it's hard to answer the question in the abstract. I think the effect of sanctions on any particular civil society group is going to depend on who the group is, who gets sanctioned, and what the group does. But in general, a lot of, just the civil society's basic interactions with the court, providing evidence, providing documentation, could be construed in the context of sanctions law as providing support to a sanctioned person if the ICC prosecutor is himself put on the sanctions list. So, US-based organizations will face like a particular degree of risk because they're expected to comply very strictly with US sanctions law. So a group in the United States would have to be extremely concerned about sharing, supporting the prosecutor, sharing evidence that would support one of these investigations. Groups that are outside the United States would, I think, have a different and even more complex set of questions to study and ask themselves to understand their risk. And just the fact that this risk is out there, that it's so incredibly complex and hard to pin down the answer to that question is what's going to have this chilling effect on civil society and the pursuit of victims and survivors of for the justice they seek, and that the ICC is uniquely positioned to help them pursue.
And I think, Mr. De Leon, you also have perspective on this question.
Yeah, just quickly. No, a lot of human rights defenders and human rights organizations have already been persecuted in the Philippines by the Rodrigo Duterte regime. Former Senator Leila de Lima was imprisoned for close to 7 years just for fighting for human rights and rule of law. And they continue to fight even without resources, and even if the Dutertes are very powerful, the last thing that they need right now is a threat of sanctions. There's already huge chilling effect for human human rights defenders and human rights organizations because they're facing a very violent group. And then the threat of sanctions from the Philippines' most important ally, the #1 trading partner, is something that will definitely prevent us to mobilize even further. Furthermore, a lot of the NGOs that are doing human rights work also rely on U.S. funding, and the moment that they are threatened by sanctions, then definitely there will be a huge impetus for them to help the victims, their families, and in gathering pieces of evidence crucial to ensure that we are able to document this and we are able to recover from the violent war on drugs.
Thank you, Mr. De Leon. And now we are joined by another speaker from a situation country, as Ms. Niemat Ahmadi. Ms. Ahmadi is a native of North Darfur. She serves as founder and president of the Darfur Women's Action Group. She previously worked as director of global partnerships for the United to End Genocide. And she has also been recognized by former President George W. Bush as one of the 8 global human rights fighters for freedom of the people, fighting for freedom of their people of the year. Ms. Ahmadi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, everyone. I'm very pleased to join you in this important discussion. Today, speaking about the threat of sanction against the ICC or individual working for the ICC. For us, as you know, the situation in Sudan is the worst crisis in our lifetime, probably. And today, the level of atrocities and the violations and crimes that are committed have not been witnessed in any crisis around the world. But to be correct, the crisis today would not have been committed or erupted without the impunity that was allowed for the previous crisis. We believe that the crisis in Sudan is a cost of immunity for the crimes committed against the people of Darfur, genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. But we were hopeful that with the ICC work, because Darfur is today the crimes committed in Darfur, the case of Darfur is under the jurisdiction of the ICC. The ICC have investigated, issued several arrest warrants for suspects, including the former president al-Bashir. And today the ICC has extended its jurisdiction to the current crimes that are committed against the people of Darfur. And if there is any sanctions that like being imposed on the ICC, it will send a dangerous precedent that these crimes are not serious, and that perpetrators will continue to commit these crimes of this nature, and they will expect to get away with impunity. And let me tell you this, the crisis today in Sudan, we have fighters and militias from across 7 countries. Sudan with the potential of like surrounding with 7 other fragile states and a country with a history of terrorism. If that crisis has not been addressed today and that perpetrators are not brought to justice, this will create a spillover across the region and will create a hub for terrorists. This will eventually affect the US and other international regions, national securities. And at that moment, it will force the US and other allies to intervene, to fight, but it will be too late. And that is why it is very, very important for us to allow the ICC to investigate, because in a country like Sudan, we don't have any judicial system. We don't have any legal system that is operating right now. And it's a serious international crime beyond the country's capacity. And also, unfortunately, we do not have any regional court in Africa that will deal with this kind of crimes. And if ICC is being hindered from pursuing perpetrator, then that will enable all the perpetrators around the world, including those that the US itself is seeking to hold them accountable, to go free.
Thank you.
So I'll stop here and we'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you so much for your powerful testimony, Ms. Ahmadi. In a moment, we'll also be putting on the chat links to another open letter. We've linked to the open letter primarily by U.S., but not solely by U.S. civil society organizations against the sanctions. There's also been a very important mobilization of efforts in the Philippines that we'll link to as well with an open letter there. I would like to go to our attendees to see if there are any more questions for our panelists before I ask them if they have any final remarks. Yes, Leanne, I'm elevating you to panelist. And you should now be able to come on video and audio.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lian. I'm a journalist from the Philippines. This question is very particular to the Philippines, so if you can bear with me, and any one of you can answer. So the Philippines is an ally of the US, and it's also not a member of the ICC currently. So does that make us fall under the definition of a protected person in the bill? And if so, how can that impact the investigation? Can the investigation be stopped? Does it mean that any subject of a warrant will be hard to arrest? We also have a recent quote from the palace that if the warrant is coursed through Interpol, we may be able to enforce it. Will that at all affect that mechanism?
I'm happy. Thank you for the question. I'm happy to make a first attempt to answer on the very specific question of whether the ICC's Philippines investigation, I think, is covered by the legislation, and whether a Filipino national, a former official, is considered a protected person by the legislation. The answer appears to be yes. The way that the legislation is written doesn't consider that a country might have been an ICC member state and have agreed to the ICC's jurisdiction and then left the court. So there's no question that the alleged crimes that happened in the Philippines while the Philippines was a member of the ICC were within the court's jurisdiction. But the way this legislation is written, it acts as if, because the Philippines is now a major non-NATO U.S. ally and not an ICC member state, it treats the court's investigation of those crimes and of the Filipino perpetrators of those crimes as unacceptable to the United States on the same grounds that investigating a U.S. official might be. That seems legally unfounded, but that's how the legislation appears to be written. We don't know how, again, a lot depends on how the executive branch would implement this legislation, and we just don't know how they would do that. But if you were trying to seek legal advice, is it risky to provide support to the ICC's Philippines investigation based on the way that it's written? It looks like the answer is yes, because they've defined this protected person concept in an extremely expansive way that's problematic in many ways, one of which is this failure to recognize that the Philippines was absolutely a member of the ICC at the time of these crimes that prompted the court's investigation. So I think that was only one of your questions, but I think that might be the one I'm best placed to speak to.
And perhaps Mr. De Leon wants to come in to further flesh out the answer on the other.
Yeah. Based on our reading of the bill of the Philippines is actually covered by the definition of protected person under the bill, because, as mentioned, the Philippines eventually pulled out, and the bill specifically state that the United States must oppose any action by the ICC in relation to major allies and who are not members or who were former members and eventually withdrew. But I just want to emphasize that it will eventually be seen on how it is exactly applied by the United States in case this particular bill will push through. What concerns me more is even based on the definition, or even if they won't apply it, it will still send a chilling effect towards all the human rights organizations and movements in the Philippines. I just like to state that, for the record, that in the case of former Senator Leila de Lima's trial, there was a substantial change in the behavior of the justice system when there was a threat of sanctions from the United States in relation to the withdrawal of just visas from the officers, withdrawal of visas from the enforcers, the chief enforcers of the violent war on drugs, when there were news that the visa of Senator Bato de la Rosa was withdrawn. Specifically, the behavior of the prosecutors in the courtroom, the behavior of everyone in the courtroom changed. In fact, even the prosecutors were joking with us defense counsels that whether or not they were in the list, the so-called list of individuals who will be sanctioned. Everything changed after that. So I would say that the chilling effect alone has a proven effect when it comes to the implementation of justice, especially in a country like the Philippines, who relies a lot on U.S. funding, whose economy is intertwined with the United States specifically, and of course, who also relies on military aid and all kinds of aid from the United States.
Dino, if I may just ask one follow-up. Thank you so much. If President Marcos decides to rejoin the court, would you think that at least alleviate some of the chilling effect, or would that fundamentally change the way that this bill would affect us?
That's gonna be good news, but I don't think that that's gonna happen anytime soon. But that's a welcome development in case we return to the ICC. But nevertheless, the chilling effect will still be there, considering that at that point there was a period of time when the investigations were commenced, and we were not members of the ICC, and that still falls under the definition of this bill.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions, Leanne. I am not seeing any further hands or questions. Just want to make sure I'm not leaving anybody out. Yes, Mr. Kyaw Win, if you would like to intervene.
Thank you. Just want to add up something that a few months ago, ICC prosecutor has seeking the arrest warrant against General May Online, who has been butchering the whole country. So who committed the Rohingya genocide, who has been giving order to bomb the civilian villages until every day. Even today, we have somewhere people were killed. Every day we are getting that kind of, yeah. So I think deciding to sanction the ICC right now, or maybe creating any obstacles to process any justice against the perpetrators, will allow the perpetrators to be more confident to commit further crimes. So that's, I think, I'm not sure people who considering to ICC is not just based on some idea or some beliefs, but not looking at the picture completely. So this is a picture, this is an area where you need to see that. And this will give example to many different dictators in different part of the world. That's how the Myanmar, Burma dictator and the military general has ended up impunity, even though killing thousands and thousands. So I don't think that we want to give this example to other troublemakers, and we have already enough dictators and troublemakers who've been killing in Ukraine and in many parts of the world. So I think this is the important point to highlight it across the media and everywhere. But the Burma is a very good example, and a very dangerous environment right now, because any obstacle creating for the proper judicial system, or anything that related to justice for Burma will only improve, or will only enhance the giving the more confidence to the general to commit more crimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Win. And I think that's a sobering and very fitting note, perhaps, to conclude the interventions, seeing no other hands at this point. I want to emphasize that this event has been recorded, and we would be very welcome. You'd be very welcome to share with your colleagues in the media. We appreciate very much those who took the time to be with us this morning on what is a very busy news day, of course, in Washington, with much else to take your attention. We've also put in the chat media contacts for further follow-up, if that can be of help. Thank you again to our esteemed panelists, Ms. Oleksandra Matviichuk, Mr. Kyaw Win, Mr. Dino S. de Leon, Ms. Niemat Ahmadi, and Mr. Adam Keith. I've been Rebecca Shute, and we appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.